So this is the time for some Dhamma exchange, conversation. You'd like to teach me something? I'll make a nice change. I enjoy. Is anyone, anything they would like to talk about this afternoon?
Share some meditation techniques for the lay people, like when you're not in regular practice, you're coming back to practice, where to start, and or let me ask it another way, what is your preferred meditation technique?
My suggestion is that you choose one meditation technique as your primary meditation, and that you have 2 or 3 other techniques as auxiliary techniques. The auxiliary techniques are applied when you get a bit stale with your main meditation technique. So if you are on retreat or practicing for many hours a day, sometimes you need just to freshen things up a little bit. But also these auxiliary techniques can be applied as antidotes to particular problems. So the 3 classic auxiliary, if you're taking the breath as your main technique or whatever it may be, then reflections on death, the loving kindness meditation, and the body contemplations. So those 3 are very powerful and effective techniques. But I think that before we talk about technique, or it's really as important perhaps to consider the attitude with which we apply these techniques. And in the 4 Iddhipadas, the 4 roads to success, we start off with chanda. And I was talking about this yesterday evening. And chanda, this will, this aspiration and desire for Dhamma, desire to practice, leads to effort, which leads to citta, which is another word for concentration. And vimamsa is a term for wisdom. It's one of the many forms or expressions of wisdom. So this and many other teachings of the Buddha remind us that the foundation for applying any technique is right motivation. And if, when you sit down to meditate, you just take stock of, the readiness of the mind for meditation. Sometimes there's a resistance in the mind, sometimes there's a lot of agitation, sometimes like dullness, and it's good sometimes just to stop and just to massage the mind a little bit before you start to make use of it. And that may include just recollecting, the reasons why you're meditating, your initial inspiration, or recollecting the virtues of the Buddha, of the Dhamma, of the Sangha. and the more often you do this, the more fluent you become, and it can become a very quick, just a few seconds or a minute or two, is just to bring the mind to that state in which it can apply the technique effectively. So I think one way of talking about meditation techniques is to consider them as discursive and non-discursive methods, or in other words, methods that use the thinking mind and those which don't. So we see anapanasati, or the scanning of the body, you're not using the thinking mind at all. Whereas recollection on death, for instance, the recollection on the goodness, the good things that you've done in your life, these kinds of recollections, rather than letting go of thinking altogether, make use of that energy of thinking, but discipline it and provide boundaries for it. So you're thinking in a systematic fashion. My favorite analogy here is of someone giving up cigarettes. So you can either just say, right from this moment onwards, no more cigarettes, or you can say, okay, today 19, tomorrow 18, and just go work down. So if you put your mind on your breath, it's like no more cigarettes. Here the addictive drug is thinking, you see, but with the second approach, then you say, okay, you want to think, you've been thinking all day, you lead a busy life, and you use your brain to make money, and you can't just switch it on and switch it off at will. So you take this steady approach where you say, you want to think, okay, think about this within these boundaries, point 1, point 2, point 3. And that way, the thinking gradually diminishes. And then you get to a point with this discursive meditation where thinking just becomes really like heavy. You just can't be bothered to think anymore. And from there you can move on to the non-discursive meditations in a very kind of natural and enthusiastic way. So whatever the technique might be called, and if we'd use the traditional terminology of samatha and vipassana, I think that practically speaking, we are looking to take the mind beyond the 5 hindrances. So if you're starting off, if you're looking at physical sensations throughout the body, trying to maintain equanimity in the face of physical sensation, or you're maintaining awareness of the inhalations and exhalations, or you're using the thinking mind in a skillful way, your goal is identical. Your goal is to take the mind beyond the reach of the 5 hindrances, because that's when samadhi arises. That's when when any kind of penetrative insight into 3 characteristics can take place. If there's still hindrances in the mind, then it's only a very superficial insight that can take place. So this is a meeting point, a common factor. And when the Buddha described the suffering or the drawbacks of the hindrances, you say that the hindrances prevent peace of mind and they prevent wisdom. So they are a hindrance both to what we call samatha or vipassana, or to peace of mind and to the wisdom faculty. So our challenge in the meditation is to take the mind beyond the 5 hindrances, and we choose a technique which will is most equipped to do that. Now, in the course of applying your primary meditation technique, if you have some thought, some memory, something come up in your mind, and you recognize it, and you just very kindly but resolutely put it down and return to your object. And in many cases, if that's a rather superficial hindrance or interruption, then merely being aware of it is enough. It just disappears. But it can also happen that your mind returns to the same thing again and again and again. And that's an indication that there's some kind of imbalance there, and it's something that needs to be recognized, and that specific antidote needs to be applied. So my understanding of samatha is not sort of a one-pointed concentration, but samatha is an umbrella term for all of the techniques that you apply to fashion the mind, to change the mind, to deal with problems. It's the whole culture of mind, is the samatha, and the vipassana is that which is directly involved in seeing the three characteristics. But these two things have to work together. So if the mind is a lot of sensual desires in the mind, and the mind just keeps returning to them as obsession with them, then this is a clear indication that we need to apply these reflections on the lack of beauty of the physical body, the asubha side, to redress that balance, because we're just seeing one particular side of the body. Or if the mind is very depressed, then meditations which will bring up some sense of joy, I say recollecting, meditation on gratitude and all those people and things that we are grateful towards, or recollection of all the good actions and the things that we're proud of in our lives. And when you think in this way, then you can feel this emotion, this kind of joy arising in your mind, and then you can take that joy, the experience of joy, as your meditation object. And that's in many ways can be a real shortcut to going beyond the hindrances. If you're feeling very lazy, and then reflection on death and the uncertainty of life, and as a means of bringing up some sense of urgency. One of the important phrases in Pali language, one that important to me, is Dhammapatipata, which means practicing Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma. So it sounds like it's a circular, what does that mean? But the word Dhamma in this sentence, or in this phrase, two occasions, the meaning is not the same. So I would translate this as meaning applying particular Dhamma techniques which are in harmony with the main principles of Dhamma. So once you've clarified what these main principles are, then you can be somewhat creative in terms of actual practices. So in the fine detail, you don't have to do everything according to the book, in other words. You see, you have a particular challenge, a particular problem, and you say, how could I deal with that in a way which is within the boundaries of Dhamma? I think if I remember last year, I spoke about using the imagination, and you can make little movies, like a movie of offering dana to the Buddha and his disciples. And so you imagine you wake up early in the morning, today you're going to go and offer food to the Buddha. How would you feel? Just imagine that. And then you're going to, first thing you're going to have a shower, you scrub, you want to be really, really super clean. And then you want to, how you imagine preparing food for the, how much care, how much mindfulness you would have in preparing this food, knowing who you're offering it to. And then you imagine you make this journey, and then you have to climb up a hill, and there's the mouth of the cave, and you go in, and it's just all dark, and it's got really kind of, and then you see the candle lights flickering, and you get a bit closer, and you see this line of monks sitting in front of you, and there's the Buddha, and there's Sariputta, and there's Moggallana, and then you can't walk anymore, you crawl, and then you bow, and just imagine, you can make like every single, seeing the Buddha for the first time, seeing the Arahants, coming down and bowing once, twice, 3 times, crawling along, putting the food in the bowl. And so you can choreograph the whole thing in great detail and do it in a very systematic way. And this is, you won't find this method in any of the suttas or in the Visuddhimagga, but I would say it's something which is in harmony with and within the boundaries of Dhamma. It's a practice which is intended to bring up emotions which are conducive to growth in the teaching and growth in practice. So I would encourage you to experiment a little bit. There's not, nobody's going to sort of rap you over the knuckles if you do something that's not in the books. You can just try stuff out and make mistakes and learn from them. Yes.
Ajahn, we, I have been listening to talks of Ajahn Sumedho, and he mentions several times unborn, uncreated, unconditioned, and that is what he refers to Nibbana. And I've been contemplating about that, and also thinking about if there is unconditioned, it should be available to me right now, not after I practice, because then it will become conditional to practice. In that sense, some glimpse of Nibbana should be available to us right now, rather than a goal that we reach after we practice and complete our journey. So, can you give some reflections on that?
Yeah, well, one of the most common analogies would be that we're removing the veils or the covering and the obscurations that prevent us from seeing that. So it's so if you're cleaning the window, it's not that the view appears because of the cleaning; it's already there. But if you don't clean the window, you can't see it. So certainly, Nibbana is not the result of a process, but it's something which is realized or penetrated by removing all that covers it or obscures it. There are. Actually, I remembered this after Q&A this morning about is Nibbana, can Nibbana be captured in this phrase non-attachment? There is a sutta, at least one sutta, where a Sotapanna or someone who's on the first two levels of referring to Nibbana as like the water at the bottom of a well. And he said, yeah, I've got to this stage now where I can see the water at the bottom of the well, but I have no bucket to pull the water out. That was how a Sotapanna expressed his, what he felt he needed to do. And so any kind of analogy for something as profound as this is only going to work on certain, but at least it gives some kind of feeling of the issue, I think.
So, Ajahn, I wanted to understand the relationship between habitual thinking versus mindfulness.
Between, sorry?
Habitual thinking and mindfulness. And what happens is that when one becomes aware of a meditation object, or to say that one is mindful, then for that particular moment, the thinking stops. And one can obviously do conscious thinking, being aware of the gaps or consciously thinking what's there. But there's no habitual thinking where the thoughts are coming or going. And then suddenly when the meditation object drops, then there is this habitual thinking which goes on without one's control over it. So is it right to say that during those moments of mindfulness with particular meditation object, there is no habitual thinking happening? And is that way to understand mindfulness?
I think one useful way of looking at thinking is the initial thought that pops up in your mind as being the result of kamma. For instance, there's a sound and it stimulates a thought. Oh, that's a bird. Oh, there's a train or something. So there's the naming of it, the sanya, and the initial thought. That is not a problem, basically. It's just a normal functioning of the brain. But where we see the role of mindfulness is in how we relate to that initial thought. So without mindfulness, then the mind tends to grab onto that thought and then add onto it and make a story out of it. And that's the kind of the habitual thinking. Whereas in the presence of mindfulness, then you have a choice whether or not to pursue that thought, because that thought might actually be kind of useful thought. So if you, for instance, you were to hear a sound and the thought came into your mind as, oh, someone's fallen over, it's a child's fallen over crying, then you don't want to just let that go, probably. You want to get up and make sure that the child is safe. So that sense of evaluation of that initial thought, and whether it's something just to let go of, or whether it's something to take notice of, whether it's significant, insignificant. These are the options that mindfulness gives you. So in the case that there is maybe some kind of insight arises on something which is some thought relating to impermanence or to dukkha or to anatta, then you might consciously take up that thought and pursue it, and as a means of reflection on the Dhamma. But then it is a mindful reflection rather than a simple habitual thinking. When the technique of dealing with like agitation that I found very useful indeed is simply to be mindful of the thinking. So when you have a like crazy agitation, the tendency is just to try to fight it and just sort of like struggling with a wild animal. But my preferred method is could be an analogy of children playing in a dark room under the stairs, being naughty, and the parent opens the door, puts on the light, and says, "Carry on. I'll just stand there and watch." And of course, the children don't do that anymore. But the parent hasn't done anything. The parent hasn't warned them or told them off, or all he's done is simply turned on the light and stood there watching. And with mindfulness, then that's what usually happens with crazy thinking. You're not fighting it, but you're not indulging in it. You just go ahead. Where does this go to? A good exercise is just to try to think for a minute without stopping on a topic. Because before I became a monk, one of my favorite radio shows, I think it's still going to this day, I think it's called Just a Minute. I don't know if anybody is familiar with this, on BBC Radio. So all these various articulate celebrities are given a topic. And you have to talk for 1 minute without hesitation, repetition, and so on this topic, and it's incredibly difficult. But it's even more than to give yourself a topic. You can just do this, like, okay, let's do this just for a few seconds. We're going to start and try and think for 1 whole minute. I'll be the timekeeper on Dhammarama, okay? So this is your topic, 60 seconds, think without stopping, without hesitation, without deviation, only on the topic of Dhammarama, beginning now. Okay, that's not a full minute, but that'll just give you some sense of how impossible it is. And I don't know if, I'm assuming your mind is somewhat similar to mine, is that when you really try to think of something, within a few seconds, it's just like garble. If you maintain this, you're not allowed to stop and sort of recalibrate, but you have to just keep going without hesitation. It just goes all over, and the thing is, you're conscious, you're aware of yourself as a sort of conscious, rational being, thinking stuff which makes no sense at all. And seeing thinking, conscious thinking, as completely out of your control is quite an important insight, I think. So that's the other point to make about dealing with runaway thinking is that the method that's most effective in dealing with it is one in which you don't feel that you're doing something. So the Tibetan method is a very good one, I think, and that is, as you catch yourself thinking, then you imagine the words that are in your mind at that moment as being written on the surface of the water, of a pond or a lake. Now, what happens when you do that? Without you intending, the words just dissolve in the water. You don't feel you're doing that. It just kind of happens, doesn't it? So it's a very elegant means of letting go of thought, because it feels like the water's doing it, you're not doing it. It doesn't strengthen the sense of me struggling with thought. Again, when thought is it's a mixture of mental activity, a mixture of words and images. So again, something which is very useful for words and sentences and thoughts is just to consciously add on a sentence ending phrase. So you think, well, after this session of Q and answer, I'm going to go down and have a cup of tea, and then you catch yourself, you see, and you say, soon after this session of Q&A, I'm going to go down and have a cup of tea, and that's anatta, or that's impermanent, or so you find a way of just very, say, elegantly adding on to the end of this stream of thought in a way that it ends on this recollection of one of the three characteristics. So then the thought actually strengthens the perception of the three characteristics rather than taking you away from it. So these are skillful means that you can try in your meditation.
This is one of a clarifying question. Many times during meditation, if I let the thoughts come and stay, I find that these thoughts are about something that I've been concerned about, like something unresolved. So letting the mind dwell on it, it kind of automatically flushes them out of the body of concerns and like allows for freedom to pursue. So sometimes I felt that it's just okay to let it be, like don't try and push it away or do anything with it, just, and it will kind of find a resolution, maybe sometimes an action to be taken after meditation is over, but it's like a reflection which is not so much like a compulsive thing, but is I would like to categorize it as wholesome. I just want to kind of have the clarification from you, if...
Yes, there are many, as I say, different approaches possible here. The two things that to be avoided are to allow this sense of enjoyment of the thought, or rejection and aversion towards the thought, because both of those reactions feed the thinking. But if there's simply a recognition of this is a wholesome thought, and just allow it just to peter out by itself, then that's a reasonable need. But there is a sutta in the Dveda Vitaka Sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya, where the Buddha said he was, as a bodhisattva, he was able to separate thinking into two kinds of thinking, wholesome and unwholesome thinking, and to think only wholesome thoughts. They were completely free of unwholesome thoughts, and his mind was full of only wholesome thoughts day and night. But after a while, he said it was tiring, and so I put down the wholesome thoughts as well. So even goodness and wholesome thoughts can be tiring sometimes, but. Yes, I think it's a good point you made, though, that sometimes these thoughts, they're reflecting legitimate concerns in our life, and that's that relates also to something I was talking about this morning, where we're coming to the real world and we're getting what's really going on here. What's the real cause of our dukkha, and what are we really worried about, and because often we can have this sense of discontent and then misinterpret its cause and think it's because we don't have enough money or because some worldly ambition is unfulfilled, where in fact when we look more closely within, it's something else entirely. But we get to know what are the thoughts and the views and the desires and the fears which are motivating our activity and our speech and our conduct in daily life in a way that would be very hard to isolate otherwise.
A little more when I ask, if I may ask. Can I ask a little more? Can I add to my question? Yeah, thanks. So if during meditation I allow a certain part of the meditation time for thoughts to play around and it leads to some clarity, is it good to be included in the practice, or should I put a discipline that do that after meditation?
It's better after meditation, really. When you go into meditation again, you should have some clear plan, and you don't want to be changing your plan and while you're meditating. So if for some time you say, okay, today if some thoughts come up, I'm going to allow them, and as a particular strategy for a particular meditation. But otherwise, I would just put them down and attend to them after the meditation is completed.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks.
The question I have seems a little controversial. It is not. I have been reading a bit about what you've been writing and hearing quite a few of your talks. You tend to use the word Buddhist quite often, although every time I hear it, there are a lot of people who are not any kind of practitioners. But dukkha is universal, doesn't wait for you to start practice and then come. So very often when one wants to share these deep understandings of daily issues that we face, it sometimes seems that the word Buddhist might actually stop them from learning the lesson or being more interested in meditation. So do you think, is it necessary? Obviously the gratitude towards the Buddha doesn't become any less by not using the word per se. But just a point that I have been wanting to share, and sometimes I'm hesitant to share because they take it home as their religion versus Buddhism, or whereas the universality of what you share is so profound and so beautiful that one wants them to benefit as well.
Yes. Well, I'm living in a at least conventional Buddhist culture, and when I became a monk, that was part of my aspiration. I was never interested in being a Buddhist missionary or a Buddhist monk in a non-Buddhist culture. I was very interested in leading the traditional life of a bhikkhu in a Buddhist culture. And going back to my suggestion that religions can be grouped in families, and that this is a education system rather than a belief system, religion. It seemed to me there are pros and cons. The pros of a belief system religion is it's very easy to transmit and to uphold, because you have just a very few number of basic dogmas, and if you can, and it's not difficult to repeat those and to memorize those. And whereas in an education system kind of religion, it's much more fragile, and it's much more dependent upon the quality of teachers who are able to transmit this whole process and the whole education system. And in Thailand and in most countries, there's been a real decline in the quality of the transmission. And so there is a great deal of misunderstanding and lack of understanding of what it means to be a Buddhist. So I felt this is one of my goals, and one of my ideals is to my job as a Buddhist monk is to say, okay, you're Buddhist, this is what you think that means, and for me being a Buddhist means this and this and this. And so really bringing this up into consciousness, don't just take it for granted. So one of these things that I say a lot when speaking with villagers or people I don't know very well is, I say it's like, let's say you had someone go to a hospital and volunteer and apply for a job as a doctor. And the admissions officer or the director says, well, where have you been practicing before? He said, well, I haven't graduated as a doctor. He said, oh, so you're still at medical college. Where are you studying? And he said, well, actually, I haven't started to study. And he said, well, how can you be a doctor in my hospital? And he said, oh, I'm a doctor by birth. My parents are doctors and my grandparents are doctors. It's in my blood. And I said, well, you know, what hospital would accept that kind of doctor? And I said, that's no difference to saying I'm born a Buddhist. My parents are Buddhists and my grandparents are Buddhists. Therefore, I'm a Buddhist. It doesn't work like that. You know, you don't inherit this. It's something you have to apply yourself to and to learn. So yeah, so that's my context, and I think if I was living in India or in another country, I probably wouldn't express it in the same way. And I think that if you are speaking with people from different backgrounds, and then you adapt your language appropriately. And Ajahn Chah himself said to Ajahn Sumedho and the other monks, if you're in America or Britain, you don't have to call it Buddhism. He says, if you're transmitting the basic principles, it's not necessarily for you to do that. So, returning to that phrase just now, like the Dhamma, which is in accordance with the Dhamma, you're choosing words and vocabulary and so on, which is honest, is true to the principles, but in the details and the idioms that you use, then you can adapt them accordingly.
Thank you so much. Can I ask one more question? Would you want to talk a little about what kind of work are you doing with the education system?
To what?
In Thailand.
The education.
In the morning you spoke something about that you're doing some work with education systems in Thailand. What kind of work is that?
Well, I think I arrived in Thailand with rather naive and unrealistic ideas about what I would meet in Thailand, and having any book that you read will tell you, Thailand's like 90-something% Buddhist, and I thought, well, it must be like heaven on earth, as a Buddhist myself. But then if you, what is the kind of like the bottom line for a Buddhist is a householder, and if you look at the books, and you would say probably 5 precepts, and then you come to Thailand, and how many people keep 5 precepts? It's probably not 5% of people keep. I don't know. I mean, it's not an impressive amount. But what troubled me more than that was, it seemed to me that the modern economic, social, cultural development of the country had almost and untraceable elements of Buddhism in it. I just couldn't see the Buddhist influence. And realized that the people who are in positions of power, these are people who graduated from MIT, Harvard Business School, Oxford, Cambridge, and while in their private life they might consider themselves Buddhist, in terms of their intellectual life and the way that they looked at the world and they looked at society, it's very little of Buddhism in it at all. And I felt this was a great shame, particularly as the Buddhism in Thailand, there's a great deal of unity in it. Certainly there are different sects and different groups, but the basic understanding of Buddhist teaching is harmonious. So it seemed to me that that's a real advantage, that the country, a resource for the country. So in the education system, I found that most of the wealthier people in the country, from middle class upwards, if you had enough money to send your child to private school, within the country they would go to Christian schools, Catholic schools, and if you were the real elite, maybe they go to boarding schools in England or America. So the people who are like the governing class, if you like, growing up with very little Buddhist influence, unless their family happened to be particularly devout. So I thought it was such a shame, and I started to try to think, well, what can I do about it? And I had my first project 2 or 3 years in the 1990s. I went to Boston in the summer holidays and took Thai students from Harvard and MIT and leading universities on like a walking meditation tour. So we would chant and meditate in the morning, and then walk through the countryside during the day, and then camp in the evening and have some campfire and some conversation. So I didn't think that university students would want to do like a 10-day retreat or something like that. But for them to have a chance to be able to talk with a Buddhist monk and just to converse and just speak in a very kind of natural way. Unfortunately, my other responsibilities were just too many at that time for me to maintain that program. Although some of the students who were involved in it are now parents at the school where I teach, or else and still have some contact with them. So eventually, one of my family, my students, the daughter had a kindergarten school, and she became rather frustrated about what the kind of education she was able to give the children. And the decision had been made to expand into primary school on the same site, and felt it was a time for some reassessment of exactly what she wanted to do, what she wanted to offer in the school. And there had been some talk and some 1 or 2 books about the possibility or the concept of a Buddhist education. And so that's how I became involved, because it was very much what I was interested in. And we sat down and we just talked through what the principles that we felt would be good examples. So they have to make a commitment to keeping the 5 precepts and to regular meditation retreats. So we have an annual meditation 7-day retreat which I give for all the teachers in our schools. And so one of the first meetings we had, and when we were mapping all this out, I was the sort of the presiding, the sort of the chairman of the meeting, and the teachers divided into two groups: the more senior ones and the younger ones, over the question whether meditation retreat should be compulsory for the teachers. So all of the senior teachers said yes, of course, should be compulsory, and all the younger teachers said it should be voluntary. So I had the presiding vote. So my decision was we should take the middle path. It should only be compulsory for those who don't volunteer. So that was our principle. And it's worked ever since. Yeah. Yes. So at the school that Prakriti school that we visited yesterday, day before yesterday, I gave an overview of the framework. And this is an expansion from the idea of the threefold training, which in itself sort of telescopes the eightfold path. And the difficulty in promoting an education based on the threefold training of Sila, Samadhi, Panya is for parents who are not really keen Buddhists. It sounds just too religious, and they're afraid, by the time they graduate, all their kids just want to be monks and nuns or something like this. So we say this is not what that's about. So I felt that there was a real need to find some alternative a schema and way of transmitting what we're trying to do, which would bypass those kinds of that kind of difficulty. And I came across teaching of the Buddha in which he, like every great teacher, he just freshens things up a bit, saying the same things more or less in a slightly different way. So instead of Sila, Samadhi, and Panya, he talked about the development of the relationship of the human being to the natural world, or the material world, the education of the human relationship to the social world, and then the development of the heart and the development of wisdom. So it's the same ground, but presented in a slightly different way. And I felt, this is something that could really work in an educational context. So how this has worked out over time is the first area of the human relationship to the material world begins with the child's own body. That's the material world that you take direct responsibility for, and that you have to have a wise relationship to. So it starts off with human biology and exercise and nutrition, sex education, or whatever, that all the things you need to know about your relationship to your body. And then the second sphere would be all those elements of the material world which you have a daily relationship, and this would include technology and social media, all these kinds of your possessions and your relationship to money, and so on. And then the third concentric sphere, as it were, would be the natural world and the environment and your relationship to the environment. So having that as your first main quadrant, then you take the academic subjects which are compulsory by law, and see which ones will fit into that area. So the physical sciences, maths, human and biology, and so they will all go in that one. And then the second area is the area of the human relationship to the social world. So we're talking about how to wisely use precepts and conventions and rituals and things to create the most conducive atmosphere for us to realize our goals as human beings, or more specific goals in academic environment or social environments. Then the education of our communication skills. This is a big one, especially in Thailand, and it's an area of practice that I think a lot of Buddhist meditators overlook, and it is a cause of so much, to me, unnecessary suffering. And if you see young people come together, and there's this romantic idea, if you just love each other, everything else will just kind of fit into place. You just love each other, and everything will be okay in the end. But I'm sure that you know so many people who argue constantly, have very unhappy married lives. It's not that they don't love each other, it's just they don't know how to talk to each other. And this idea that this should be something that just comes naturally. But there is a lot to learn, and it's something that you can study, how to communicate with each other effectively. And that's part of Sila, that's part of the Eightfold Path, I think. And then the third part of this second quadrant, as it were, is instilling this desire to make the world a better place and to contribute to the society and to help the society be free of injustice and poverty, and to make the society better in whatever way you can. So it's a social conscience, in other words. So those are the two external elements. And again, in that, then history and sociology, economics, all these kind of things can be fitted into that second quadrant. Then the third quadrant is the heart and the emotions. And this, of course, is the area in which conventional schooling is most deficient. And particularly if you're teaching adolescents, and you see how much they suffer from anxiety and from stress, from depression, from anxiety, and so on. And it seems to me that schools should be giving some advice on how to deal with these things wisely, and how to protect the mind from unwholesome dhammas, how to let go of unwholesome dhammas, how to cultivate wholesome dhammas. So mindfulness practices will play a part of that, and many other exercises and projects and things to develop this emotional maturity and some growth in Dhamma and some inner peace and inner contentment and gratitude for all those who've helped us and etc. And then the wisdom faculty, beginning with developing good critical thinking skills, creative thinking skills, and then going on to more Buddhist contemplations, yoniso manasikara, wise reflections and ways of reflecting on life. That I was talking about this in terms of meditation. So if you feel a lot of negativity, ways of developing thoughts of kindness and forgiveness to overcome that, or if you're a lot of sensual thoughts, and be able to look on the less beautiful aspects of the body. And then introduction to idea of vipassana and so on, but that's not like really part of the school remit, but that's there if people are interested in so that's the general kind of overall program or structure for the what the schools are offering at the moment. So it's early days yet. We're learning as we go along. Yes.
So, Ajahn, continuing with the issue of education, I just wanted to ask, how do you think we can sensitize the students at school as well as college level to the need for precepts, and also how to help them get de-addicted from the use of electronic gadgets, which is becoming a very major problem. Particularly, I'm teaching in a college, and it's becoming a very, very major problem. Students are enormously addicted to the sensory pleasures and also electronic gadgets, and most of the time they're not able to appreciate some very basic precepts that are expected even traditionally, for example, cheating in the exams or things of that kind. So how do you think we can sensitize them to these very fundamental things?
No, cheating in exams is, it's not, you're probably aware, this is not a Indian problem, it's a worldwide problem. I recently read an article in England, in English newspaper, about the University of Manchester, I think, where in 1 month they found 450 cases of cheating online, looking for accessing websites that will do the work for you, and these things. So this is one of the way technology is. There's a constant kind of, the cheaters get ahead, and then you sort of catch up with the cheaters, and they come up with something else. And it is the values of the society at large, that when you have a society which champions like success at all costs, the end justifies the means, you'd be stupid not to, all these kinds of values, and it trickles down, and this is what you get in. And so I think when you see all these kinds of problems in student bodies and children, you say, well, we have to look at the adult, look at where this is coming from. We're in traditional hierarchical societies like India and Thailand and so on. We're going through this transitional period where, not so long ago, in our memory, what mum and dad said was law, and that's it. And if you're a good son or a good daughter, you don't argue. But those days have gone now. And we're in that kind of awkward in-between, where maybe parents still have this expectation that their kids should be like that, and yet maybe they send them off to study in the West, where the value system is almost directly opposite, and then expect the key ways rather than a bad thing. When parents in Thailand come to me and say, my son, I've been taking my son and my daughter to the temple since they were small, now they're in their teens and they rebel and they don't want to go, and my son says he's not a Buddhist anymore, he doesn't have a religion and he doesn't see the value of it, and I just feel despair. And I said, well, no, I mean, that's actually very good. It means that you have to sit down and you have to work out why do you take your son to the temple? What do you think is the value of it? And if you can't answer your son, I sympathize with your son more. If you can't justify why you do what you do, and then I don't blame him for thinking it's superstition. So you have to be able to work this out and to be able to explain it, and so I think it's a good thing in that way, rather than we all just take these traditions for granted and somehow we take the child to the temple and somehow like osmosis he'll just sort of suck up all this goodness and become a good person. That's not necessarily going to happen. Today, in the evening, I gave a talk and talking a little bit about precepts from Buddhist point of view, that they're not commandments from on high enforced with reward and punishment system. If you do this and you keep all the rules, you go to heaven. If you don't, go to hell. But we start off from something that we're all concerned with right here and now, our families, our schoolrooms, our workplace, our society. And as human beings, given all our flaws and our faults, and what is the best we can do to create a conducive, healthy atmosphere at home and in the workplace, and what's the bottom line? So I would suggest bottom line for human flourishing is sense of safety. If you don't feel safe in your house, if you don't feel safe in your neighborhood, then it's very unlikely that you're able to cultivate any more profound spiritual values. It's just too much stress just keeping yourself together and your family together. Even if you have you have a fully enlightened arahant, or you have a sadguru on speed dial, or on FaceTime, or living at the bottom of your garden. If you're surrounded by violence and prejudice, and every time your child goes out the house, you're on tenterhooks till they come home, you're not going to get very peaceful. So, Buddhism is not just saying, just close your eyes and, let go and everything will be okay. That's not what the Buddha taught at all. He didn't just teach the Dhamma, he taught the Dhamma and the Vinaya. So these two things go together. So the Vinaya is not just the monk's rules, as how it's often understood, but it means all the ways in which we create through laws, agreements, conventions, regulations. We create the best possible environment we can for us all to grow in Dhamma. So for a householder, the proposition is that the best way we can do that is through keeping precepts. So we start off again with human nature. So let's say you get angry about things, okay, and if your anger reaches a certain point and you lash out and you act violently. So you can't, as an act of will, you sort of have a change of heart, and you say, from now on, I'm never going to get angry with anybody. I'm just going to feel love and compassion. Now I'm a disciple of the Buddha, or I'm now a disciple of my Guru. That would just be lying to yourself, wouldn't it? Because emotions and accumulated emotions and these do not respond to volition, to telling yourself, to self-discipline. You can't decide to feel a different way, but you can decide not to act upon those feelings. So if you were to say to someone or all those around you, say, look, you know me, sometimes I really lose my temper, I get very upset and angry and so on, and I'm working on that. It's just to take some time, but in the meantime, I promise you that I will not abuse you physically and verbally under any circumstances. That's difficult to do, but it's workable, it's doable, and a lot of people do it. And if someone says that to you, someone you're living with or someone is close to you, you just relax, don't you? You just feel safe. And so keeping precepts is often, why young people in particular, it's like you're taking away their human rights to self-expression, or you're putting them in a cage or in a jail, and it's not right, it's not fair, they should be free. But that's not the best way to present what precepts are. And these are gifts. These are gifts of safety to all those around. You're allowing people to feel safe. I'm not going to harm you. I'm not going to steal from you. If you're my spouse, I'm not going to cheat on you. I'm not going to say that I will never feel attracted to anybody else, that you're the only one. If maybe that's true when you first fall in love, but not forever. So you say, I'm just a normal person. Sometimes I feel attracted to that but I will never act upon those feelings. I will never do anything behind your back to hurt you. And you can relax, can't you? You don't expect your spouse to be, Superman or Superwoman and just perfect in every way. But it's a workable standard. It's something that you can relax with and feel comfortable with. So precepts is a way of giving a gift of safety, and if we all do that, then it's obvious, it's not an act of faith, you know just how good that feels. And wouldn't you rather live in an environment where you can trust everybody around you and you feel comfortable with them, and you don't have to worry someone's going to steal from you or someone's going to try and take your boyfriend away from you, or it seems to me quite obvious that this is the most intelligent way of living together as human beings. So just saying, it's just smarter to keep precepts. It's kinder, it's smarter, it's just superior in every way. So I think we need to come back to say how we're explaining these things. We say you should, you do that's bad, you go to hell, it's destroying the society. But this is communication skills also. With mobile phones and things, I think it's important. I'm surprised how many educational institutes don't ban phones from the classroom. It would seem to me absolute first thing that okay, you can use your phones outside or in the break time, but every phone should be turned off in the classroom. I think with phone usage now, they're starting to have apps and that tell you how long you use your phone every day. That's quite good. Sobering, but good. I think that it's important to stress phone-free periods in a day, particularly last thing at night and first thing in the morning. Those are times when you just want to calm your mind or you want to do some meditation. And now in Thailand, some people last thing at night, people go to meditate before they go to bed, so do it they're feeling kind of good, and then they're going to lay down to sleep and just can't help themselves. And then all that peace that they've accumulated is just gone out the window in 10 seconds. And then they get up in the morning and they use the phone as an alarm clock. And you say, so. So it's like last thing at night and first thing in the morning, you're plugged into all this stuff, So I would recommend turning off the phone at least half an hour, at least before you go to bed at night, and first half an hour or an hour in the morning at the very least. And for children, bringing up children, to take them out into the countryside, go camping, go walking, go in Wi-Fi, signal-free areas, but make it enjoyable, not just like a punishment. And so you say, yeah, we had a great time today, didn't we? And we didn't look at our phones once, and that's a good thing to do.
Ajahn, my question is, as we go more deeper into our meditation, and we also realize that we have so many prejudices and judgments about people or situations, And sometimes a mind thinks that they are right and we end up sharing with others, and sometimes that reinforces that, and sometimes they may be wrong. So can you reflect on like how we can make a good judgment, and because sometimes those are helpful for us in taking some decisions. So can you elaborate on that, like we may, if they are right or wrong, like we don't get overpowered by them and end up taking unfair decisions, or and be more objective in our approach, and rather than being completely influenced by those prejudices and judgments.
Well, I think as you meditate, then you become, you're in a way you're your own guinea pig, in that your most intimate study of the nature of greed, hatred, delusion, jealousy, arrogance, and so on is by looking at those things in your own heart. And the more that you recognize them in yourself, then the more easy it is to recognize them in other people. So you do start to have and also with the positive qualities as well. So I think you begin to have a more reliable sense of where people are when you speak to them, from their facial expressions, from their tone of voice, from their from so many indicators. Nevertheless, you always have that humility that you are translating. You don't really know, you can never know what's going on in somebody's heart. And unless you have that psychic power. So the moment you start to think, oh, he's like this and she's like that, and then, just be careful. That's an interpretation. That's a translation rather than a true insight. So it's really that kind of humility and just reminding yourself, I'm pretty convinced that's what's going on here, but it's not 100% and I could be wrong. So I guess this very simple answer to your question is just having that in your mind. I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Based on all the evidence, based on my intuition, based on my experience, that's what I think. That's my take on what's going on here. But I could be wrong. So always remembering that uncertain, unpredictable, impermanent nature of things as to prevent us becoming too convinced that of the validity of our own judgments and interpretations. Okay, that's the afternoon session. We have a short break now. Please feel free. How is
Maybe a 10-minute break and then.
Yeah, there's like 0. We break from 3:40 to 3:40.
Well, it's maybe 3:30 to 3:40.
Oh, it's 3:30 to
Yes.
3:40. Oh, I see. Okay, I got you.